My name is Brittany, I'm 35, and if someone had told me that at 30 I'd still be spending most of my life staring into open mouths, I'd probably have laughed, but I've been a dentist for 10 years now, and I must admit, it's not a bad one. The clinic where I work is quite large, patients come in thick and fast, and my boss, a perpetually busy person, constantly dumps his work on me, assuring me, "You're responsible, Brittany, you can handle it," and, as usual, I can handle it. When he's not around, I become more than just a doctor. I'm like a CEO in a skirt, sorting through bills, calling suppliers, sitting over paperwork that would give normal people a migraine, and for some reason, the whole time, trying to convince myself that I still have a personal life. The last 2 months have turned into an endless marathon with no finish line. My boss went on vacation. They say he's having some family drama at home, his wife's having a fight over his phone, and I was shouldering the weight of everything: patients, accounting, and staff. Evenings would remain in the empty clinic, when it was already dark outside, and only the light from the desk lamp reflected off the sterile instruments. My back ached from bending over endlessly, my eyes burned with fatigue. And I caught myself thinking that even the whir of the dental drill sounded like an invitation to rest. I desperately needed a break, a human one, at least a couple of days to remember who I was, beyond a woman in a white coat with a perpetual headache. I have a small house on a lake, just 40 minutes from the city, but it feels like another universe. I bought it 3 years ago, a modest place, an old wooden pier, silence, the scent of pine trees, and water that sparkles like melted glass in the mornings. There, I feel like time stands still, and no one demands a signature, a diagnosis, or a report. My parents come there sometimes. I gave them the keys so they could breathe fresh air instead of arguing all day about who forgot to turn off the stove. My younger brother, Jake, also has a key. 2 years ago, he married a woman named Cassandra, and she sure knows how to turn even a sunny day into a gloomy one. She's 28, and from the first moment we met, I sensed a wall of ice hiding behind that dazzling smile. She carries herself as if the world revolves around her, speaks to people in a tone usually used to announce a death sentence, and looks at Jake as if he's not her husband but his personal assistant. I tried to be polite for my brother's sake, but she seemed to relish the fact that she pushes me to the limit. Every time we met, she made caustic comments about my work, about how sad it is to live without a husband, as if the absence of a man automatically makes a woman subhuman. But Jake was beaming with happiness, so I decided to keep quiet, let them use my house. I thought, it was mostly empty anyway, and my brother deserved a little joy. When Friday finally arrived and my boss announced he'd be back on Monday, I almost cried with relief. 2 months without a day off had taken their toll, and the thought of 2 days of silence ahead seemed like a luxury. I decided, no plans, no calls, just the lake, a book, bad food, and wine. After work, I stopped at the supermarket, and the familiar rustling of bags seemed pleasant for the first time in a long time. I stocked up on pasta, some chicken, sauce, cheese, a fresh salad, a bottle of red wine, chocolate, because life without it is meaningless, and also bought shampoo and shower gel, since I'd run out last time, and going into town for them would have been a crime against relaxation. I carefully packed the bags in the trunk, turned on my favorite radio station, and drove off. It was a rare evening. The sky seemed to glow with a soft amber light, the roads were empty, the wind smelled of grass and warmth. With each mile, the tension in my chest melted, and I could already imagine opening a bottle of wine, leaning on the porch railing, and simply breathing. The car turned smoothly onto a familiar country road. The sun almost disappeared behind the forest, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. But as soon as I pulled up to the house, the smile froze. Something was wrong. A strange car was parked in the driveway, a silver SUV, definitely not mine or my parents'. Lights were on in the windows, and I heard the faint sounds of music. A jacket, clearly a man's, was hanging on the porch. I stopped, turned off the engine, and sat for a long time, looking at the house that should have been empty. The windows were lit up with a bright, almost blinding light, as if someone had turned on every light in the house to ensure not a shadow could hide. There were 3 cars in the small parking lot, and I recognized one immediately, Jake's silver sedan. The others were unfamiliar. My heart gave an unpleasant lurch. Jake hadn't said anything about coming. No one had said anything. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds, staring at the house that should have been my peace, not An uninvited party, music, booming and tasteless, wafted through the night, its low bass pounding the air, as if someone was deliberately trying to push me out even before I reached the door. I knocked, once, then again, harder, then so hard my knuckles turned white. No reaction. The music thundered, laughter, voices, and no sign that anyone had even heard the knock. Then I took out the key ring, the same one I'd given to Jake and my parents, and inserted the key into the lock. A click, I pushed the door open, and the world inside hit me with a mixture of cheap alcohol, perfume, and something fried. The same smell that lingers in the air after too many rowdy guests. The first thing I saw was the crowd. There were 10 people in my living room, maybe more. Cassandra stood by the kitchen with a glass in her hand, flushed, laughing, uninhibited to the point of indecency. Her parents were sitting on my couch, comfortable, relaxed, as if in their own home. The rest were strangers, men and women I'd never seen before, but judging by their familiar features, they were all part of her chosen race. As she liked to put it, empty wine and beer bottles lay scattered on the coffee table. Someone was clearly drinking straight from the bottle. My windows were wide open, the curtains drawn back, and loud music was blaring from speakers I'd definitely never bought. When I entered, one of the guests noticed me and seemed to react faster than the others. The music abruptly stopped, a heavy, awkward silence fell over the room. Everyone turned. Their gazes weren't embarrassed or guilty, as I'd naively expected, but irritated, almost angry, as if I'd intruded, as if I wasn't the mistress of this house, but an uninvited guest. Cassandra slowly turned to face me. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glittered, and a drunken insolence was already evident in them. She placed her glass on the table, placed her hands on her hips, and said clearly, defiantly, "What are you doing here?" I stood there, speechless. What am I doing here? I repeated her words to myself and felt something cold and sharp spread across my chest. This is my home, Cassandra. What are you doing here? I finally managed, slowly, so as not to lose my temper. She snorted, threw her head back, and, without taking her eyes off me, said with feigned innocence, "We have a key, so we can come and visit whenever we want. Relax, Brittany, it's just a vacation." I glanced at her parents. They were silent, sitting with expressions as if they were bored with the whole situation. The rest of the relatives didn't interfere either, merely watching with a kind of cold curiosity, as if waiting to see how I would act next. I tried to breathe evenly. "I came here for the weekend," I said quietly, almost wearily, "so the party's over, pack up and go." Silence fell for a moment, then suddenly broke with loud voices. Someone indignantly asked, "Are you serious?" Another added, laughing, "We just got here." Cassandra screamed louder than anyone, "Why is this stupid leech even here?" she shouted, turning to her group, and then, looking them straight in the eyes, she hissed, "Get out of here before we kick you out." The words hit me harder than a slap. I looked at them, at faces that should have felt at least a shred of shame, but I saw only indifference. They looked at me as if I were an annoying misunderstanding, an interruption to their evening, and, strangely, that was precisely what brought a smile to my face, not a cheerful one, but a cold, tired one. I straightened up, nodded, and said quietly, "Okay." I turned and left. As the door slammed behind me, I heard someone shout something like "leech" behind me, then "lonely old woman," and a few other words best left unsaid. I walked to the car, still smiling, but anger was boiling inside, so intense it felt like my skin was on fire. My hands shook as I started the engine. It was so quiet inside that I could hear my own breathing. The drive back took 40 minutes, and the whole time I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went numb, and my thoughts darted around like birds trapped in a glass cage. I returned home after midnight, and the city greeted me with that special emptiness that only comes at the end of a long day, when even the wind seems tired of rustling the leaves. The apartment smelled clean, as it always does after a thorough cleaning, and the contrast with the chaos I'd just witnessed made me shudder. I unloaded the bags from the trunk and set the groceries out on the kitchen table, but my appetite had vanished. All those pastas, salads, wine, and chocolates now seemed meaningless, like stage sets from someone else's life. I put on the kettle, got some mint tea from the cabinet, and just sat there, watching the steam rise from the mug, as if trying to draw something in the air. My head was buzzing, but my thoughts were too clear, painfully precise. I recalled everything in order, like a bad movie you can't seem to turn off. When Jake married Cassandra 2 years ago, I paid for almost the entire wedding. Back then, I thought I was just doing a good deed, like an older sister who'd had it a little better than everyone else. They wanted everything to be beautiful: a white arch on the beach, live music, flowers that looked like they'd been pulled out of a fashion magazine, an expensive photographer, dishes with names no one could pronounce. And when Jake and his parents came to me, embarrassed, asking for help, I didn't hesitate. They said Jake hadn't saved enough, and his parents had a pension, so I simply wrote a check, $18,000. I remember Cassandra saying, "How sweet," and walking away without even thanking me. I didn't think much of it then, now I understand, it was worth it. Then there was the apartment. About a year ago, Jake started having problems at work. His sales department had been cut, his commissions had been slashed, and he'd call me with a voice that was already hinting at despair, saying, "This is temporary," and Cassandra, of course, wasn't working. She liked to say that she was made for more, that her mission was to be a wife, a muse, and an ornament, as it turned out. At my expense, Jake asked me to help with the rent, just for a couple of months, he said, until he got back on his feet. I agreed, because he was my brother, and family is something you don't abandon. But those 2 or 3 months turned into a year. For 12 months straight, I transferred $1,400 to the landlord, each time convincing myself that this was the last time, that now everything would be alright. But then Jake would call, say things were still tough, and I'd pay again. 50, 100, 200 times I went over this arithmetic of generosity in my head while sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea. And that wasn't all. I had a separate account, the one I opened in case life threw something unexpected, an accident, an illness, even a hurricane. There were $25,000 in it, and I gave Jake access because I still believed the family wouldn't betray me. I told him only if it was truly necessary, and he promised, and then I started noticing the money slipping away. $300 here, $400 there, then $1,000. He never mentioned it, I never asked. I just transferred my savings back in to bring the balance back up, naively, foolishly, like I was trying to fill a hole with gold dust, hoping it would hold. And then there was the car, or rather, her car. Cassandra really wanted a new car. White, with a panoramic roof and leather seats, and as a wedding gift, I agreed to pay their car loan, $320 a month, 2 years straight, $8,000, to be exact. And now, sitting in the dimly lit kitchen, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to add it all up: the wedding, the rent, the car, the bills, more than $50,000, half a century of trust squandered on 2 ungrateful people, and in return, the word leech thrown at me in my own home. I finished my tea. It had already gone cold and tasted bitter, a reminder of my own mistakes, and then I realized I could no longer be their salvation, that no family gives you the right to trample on someone else's kindness. I stood up, took out my phone, and opened my banking app. My fingers trembled, but not from doubt, from rage and a strange lightness. I opened the automatic payments section, found Jake's apartment lease, and hit cancel. I paused for a second, simply staring at the screen, and then moved on to the next one, Cassandra's car loan, and cancelled it too. That's it. My chest grew quiet, as if the air had finally cleared after a long storm. I looked at my reflection in the black glass of the window. It looked older than it had this morning, but its eyes were clearer than ever. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness that somehow felt like long-awaited freedom, and I went to the bank no longer with a tremor of doubt, but with the intention of putting an end to it. At the branch, I was shown to a manager I knew named Patricia, a woman with a calm tone and an attentive gaze. I briefly told her that I wanted to remove Jake's access to my emergency account because I couldn't stand it any longer. She quickly made changes to the system, checked the documents, and quietly announced that access had been blocked. And the moment she closed the screen, it was as if a switch had flipped in my chest. I didn't make a scene, I didn't call Jake or Cassandra, I didn't yell at my relatives, because I thought it was more important to demonstrate boundaries with actions, not slogans. And while the word boundary doesn't sound like a family word, I think it was exactly what they'd been missing for a long time. A week passed, and on Friday, the phone rang. Jake burst into the line, accusingly, barely even greeting me. "Why hasn't the landlord received the payment?" I answered evenly, without shaking, "Because I'm not paying anymore. I've closed my account and cancelled the auto payment on Cassandra's car." There was silence on the other end, followed by a nervous scream. "Are you crazy? What's wrong with you?" I'm fine, I said. If Cassandra allows herself to come into my house, act like she owns it, and yet live off me, then she should get on her own 2 feet. Jake hung up. A few minutes later, another number started calling, Cassandra, but I didn't answer. She was sending short, snarky messages. You're greedy, you're selfish, how can you do this to your family? And every word thrown at me only strengthened my resolve, because words don't change facts. The money was gone, the politeness was gone, and the only thing left was the feeling that someone had long ago crossed the line of respect. I didn't argue with the texts, I read them and smiled, at that light, unexpected laugh that escaped me right there on the couch, where their empty bottles had recently been lying. Later, Mom called, her voice was soft, but there was weariness and fear of discord in it. Brittany, darling, you have to understand Jake, he loves Cassandra, she can be capricious, give in for the sake of the family, and I listened, feeling her words drown in a sea of 2 years' worth of accumulated emotions. Mom, it's not about being capricious, I said calmly, it's about respect, I won't pay for someone else's dishonesty. She paused, then quietly said, I understand, but it hurts to hear that, and we hung up, unable to find the words to lift the weight that hung between us. The following week, I went to the lake house and called the locksmith ahead of time to change the locks. I didn't want to make a scene, I wanted action, simple, practical protection for what was truly mine. He was already waiting at the porch with a set of tools, working quickly and silently, and when the new keys landed in my pocket, for the first time in a long time, I felt the boundary restored. I walked through the house, checked the windows, closed the cabinets, and felt a heavy weight settle in my chest, not peace, but clarity. The decision to no longer support those who don't appreciate me became a ritual of liberation. I pulled out old photo albums from the closet, filled with pictures of Jake as a child and of our shared holidays, and suddenly realized how much I'd invested, trying so hard to think I was helping, not just saving someone else's habit of convenience. I carefully returned the album to the shelf and felt a lightness that wasn't joy, but honest. I wasn't looking for gratitude, but for basic respect, for myself, for my boundaries, for my home. I didn't tell my parents about all the banking details, they were content with what had happened, and when the locksmith left, I locked myself inside, sat on the veranda steps, and stared for a long time at the water, which moved quietly, as if the world was agreeing to move on, even if I wasn't yet. Then I paid the locksmith in cash, and when the money left my hand, I felt a bit of weight lift. I spent that weekend at the lake house, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt more like an embrace than a fear, thick, almost tangible, filling rooms once filled with the laughter of strangers, and in that silence, I finally felt like I belonged again. I read old magazines, walked along the shore, brewed tea, and listened to the wind glide gently across the water, as if the world were whispering, you did everything right. When Wednesday arrived, and I was standing at the stove stirring dinner, someone knocked on the door. An insistent knock, familiar yet out of place. I peered through the peephole and saw Mom, Dad, and Jake, without Cassandra. That in itself was a scene with subtext. Absence spoke louder than words. They knew that if she showed up, the conversation would end before it even began. I opened the door and invited them in, though my chest ached at the sight of them all three again, as if it were a family meeting against one. We sat at the kitchen table, and the silence hung heavy in the air at first, then began to burn. Jake spoke first, with the forced gentleness that always precedes requests. Brittany, I understand why you're upset. I talked to Cassandra, she's willing to apologize, but on one condition. If you give me everything back, the rent, the car loan, and access to the bank account. For a second, I didn't even realize he was joking. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because perhaps only laughter could keep me from screaming. I'm not giving anything back, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Mom frowned. Dad looked down at the table, as if examining an invisible crack in the wood. I pulled out my phone, scrolled down to my messages with Cassandra, and turned it toward them. Do you want to know what she's been texting me all week? I asked calmly. They leaned closer, and the silence in the room changed. It became thick, awkward, almost sticky. It was all there, her mockery, her taunts, her venomous words, written with the confidence of someone who feels invulnerable. She called me an old maid, a worthless woman, pathetic, ugly, envious. She wrote that I was mean because no one wanted me, and that I should get plastic surgery if I wanted anyone to even look at me. I sat quietly while they read, watching their faces change. Mom blushing with shame, Dad looking like he couldn't breathe, and Jake just said nothing. He didn't even try to tell me it wasn't true. That's what your wife thinks of me, I said. And you really think I should continue to pay for her life? Silence fell over the table again, only the ticking of a clock somewhere on the wall seemed louder than the words. Mom cleared her throat cautiously, as if trying to defuse the tension. Brittany, I know it hurts, but Jake is having a hard time right now. He's having money problems. You have to help your brother. After all, he's your family. I sighed, feeling the anger and weariness converge inside me into a single line, straight. Even, final. No, Mom, I'm not going to support them anymore. Not him, not her. Family isn't a cash cow. I've done this for years, and all I've gotten in return is insults and humiliation. I've had enough. Jake stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so that its legs creaked loudly on the floor. Fine, if that's what you want, he said coldly and headed for the door. Mom stood up next, and Dad rose silently, not looking at anyone. He hadn't said a word the entire time, and there was something even heavier in that silence than the reproaches. When the door closed behind them, I remained sitting at the table, looking at my cold dinner, wondering if I'd gone too far, but then I remembered Cassandra standing in my house, drunk, with a contemptuous smirk, and how she'd called me a leech, and everything fell into place again. 2 weeks passed, I immersed myself in work, not letting thoughts of family drown my days. The clinic had settled into its usual rhythm again, the patients were smiling, the boss had finally sorted out his personal problems and returned, taking charge of the affairs. Life seemed to have improved, and only occasionally, in the quiet of the evenings, would I catch myself listening to the phone, as if waiting for a call that shouldn't come. And then it finally rang. It was Mom. Her voice was strained, as if she was choosing her words carefully to avoid offending anyone. Brittany, I thought you should know Jake and Cassandra have been evicted. They're moving in with us. I simply replied, thanks for telling me, Mom, and hung up. I felt a little sorry for them, my parents, not my brother. They had chosen this cross themselves, and now they would have to bear it. I, however, had finally chosen myself. Another 2 months passed, work was going well, and I felt a renewed confidence I hadn't had in a long time. On my free weekends, I retreated to my house by the lake, the same house where now there was only silence, and where, sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee, I sometimes thought how strange it was. You only have to close one door, and life suddenly begins to breathe freely. Then Mom called again, and I could tell from her voice that she was exhausted beyond words, as if someone was slowly squeezing the strength out of her day after day. Brittany, I need to talk to you, she said, sounding like she was about to cry. I exhaled, put the papers aside, took off my glasses, and asked calmly, though my insides were tense, what happened, Mom? And then she said the name I'd been trying not to hear at all lately. It's Cassandra, she said. I can't take it anymore. I'm tired of her living here. She's impossible. I remained silent. I just listened, because I knew that if I started saying anything now, she would close up and hang up. She's always unhappy about something, Mom continued. She demands special food. I have to cook separately for her. She doesn't like the way I clean. She doesn't like the temperature in the house. She doesn't like anything. Brittany, I said quietly, just to let her know I was still on the line, and she bosses us around, Mom added, sounding so tired that I wanted to close my eyes and imagine her sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Last week, she made your dad rearrange the furniture in the living room. She wanted the couch against the other wall. Your dad has back problems, you know. And then she made me go through the kitchen cabinets because she said they were a mess. I have high blood pressure. Brittany, I can't do all this. I felt something inside me tighten, a mixture of anger and pity. What does Jake say about all this? I asked finally. Mom chuckled softly, but it wasn't joy, it was bitterness. He protects her, every time, always makes excuses. I exhaled. Well, you let them move out, Mom, now you have to deal with this yourself. There was a brief pause, and then she said, barely audible, Brittany, please, but I didn't answer. I hung up. Yes, it sounded cruel, but I warned you, they had chosen this. 2 more months passed, and I finally felt free. Only 4 months since I broke up with Jake and Cassandra, and life seemed to have returned to me. I slept peacefully again, I could taste food again, I laughed with my coworkers instead of just nodding at their jokes, money stopped slipping through my fingers, I had saved a decent amount, and for the first time in years, I caught myself thinking that I could buy the car I'd dreamed of for years but had been putting off, because it all went to my brother, his wife, and their eternal, temporary difficulties, the day everything changed. I was at work, immersed in my work, when the receptionist popped her head into my office and said, "Brittany, your parents are waiting for you. They said it was important." I looked up, surprised, but left. I was on break, so we met at the cafe across the street. They were already seated at a table, my mother holding her cup in both hands, as if warmed not so much by the coffee as by the feeling of it, and my father looked tired, older, somehow drained. I sat down across from her, and my mother got straight to the point, without the usual introductions. "Jake and Cassandra are getting a divorce," she said quietly, as if afraid someone would overhear. I blinked, taking in what she'd just said. She was unhappy about everything. My mother continued, "Their lives have changed. They no longer have access to your money. They're living with us. She's angry, she's unhappy, she thinks everything is ruined." Then, for the first time in a long time, my father spoke. His voice was low and tired. "She told Jake he was worthless, that he couldn't provide for his wife, and she posted it all online." My mother added that Cassandra had written a Facebook post, a humiliating, long one, calling Jake stupid, weak, unworthy, a man who had ruined her life. I pressed my lips together. "And what did he do?" I asked. My father looked at me, then away, as if he still couldn't believe it. "He filed for divorce last week." I nodded slowly. "Okay, that's probably the smartest thing he's ever done." This time, my mother didn't object. My father didn't either. They just sat there, tired, drained, as if they'd been living with someone else's storm for too long. We finished our coffee in silence, and they left. A few months later, Mom called again and said the divorce was officially final. Cassandra had moved back in with her parents and stopped writing nasty things about Jake online. She must have found a new audience for her complaints. And a couple of months later, better news arrived. Jake got a new job, Mom said. And for the first time in a long time, a quiet pride rang in her voice. "A really good one, Brittany. He's making more money than ever." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's wonderful," I replied, and I truly felt it, not out of politeness, but genuinely. "He moved out of our house and got his own apartment," she continued. "He's doing well," and I felt a strange calm, almost tenderness, for my brother, for fate, for this long, exhausting circle that was finally beginning to close. Perhaps losing Cassandra was the cold shower he needed to finally grow up. After that, for the first time in a long time, there was silence in my life, real, calm, and tranquil, without phone calls complaining, without requests, without the perpetually tense conversations where you could feel the tension beneath every word. I enjoyed working again, everything was going swimmingly, patients were happy, colleagues respected me, my boss finally stopped being irritated and started smiling again, and on weekends, I retreated to my lake house, where I could simply sit on the veranda, listen to the rain pounding the roof, and feel like I belonged to myself again, not to someone else's whims or dead obligations. Sometimes I thought about Jake and my parents, but now there was no pain in these thoughts, only a tired, quiet regret and a slight gratitude to fate that everything had finally settled down. A few months had passed since his divorce when my mother called out of the blue, and I heard that special intonation in her voice, the one she usually used to begin news. That made my insides freeze. "You'll never guess what happened," she said, and I knew right away I didn't want to guess. "What again?" I asked, already feeling my shoulders tense. My mother paused and then exhaled. "Cassandra tried to get back together with Jake." I almost dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Absolutely serious. She called him last week. She said she realized everything, that she made a mistake, that she wants to make it right." I chuckled, not knowing whether to laugh or be surprised by the shamelessness. "And what did he tell her?" I asked. "He said no. He said he didn't want anything to do with her anymore." I caught myself smiling. "That's right, he's a good boy." Mom sighed. "She took it badly, Brittany, really badly. She kept calling him, texting him, she showed up at his work a few times, and once, she even showed up at his apartment. Jake told her he'd call the police if she didn't leave him alone." I just whistled. "She's devastated," Mom said. "She probably realized what she's lost. Jake has a great job now, he makes good money, he seems happy, and she gave it all up." We talked for a while. Then she hung up, and I sat on the couch for a long time. Holding the phone in my hand, there was a strange feeling inside me, not malice, no, more like justice. She'd treated Jake like trash, destroyed everyone around her, and now she found herself in front of a mirror reflecting everything she'd done. A week passed, and I returned home from work early, put the kettle on, and turned on the TV, just to hear something in the empty house. When the phone rang, I barely glanced at the screen, just automatically pressing the button. "Hello," I said, and froze when I heard a voice. "Brittany, it's Cassandra." I almost dropped my mug. My first impulse was to hang up, but curiosity won out. "What do you need, Cassandra?" I asked dryly. "I need your help," she said. Her voice was trembling, plaintive, almost pleading, and if I hadn't known what she was capable of, I might even have believed her. "Please, Brittany, I know I've been terrible, I've said terrible things, but I need you to help me get Jake back. He won't listen to me. Maybe if you talk to him." I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. I laughed until my stomach hurt. "Are you seriously calling me right now to help you get my brother back?" I asked. "After everything you've done?" She sobbed. "I made mistakes, I understand now. But Jake and I were made for each other. We had a good time." I chuckled. "No, we weren't. You treated him like a servant, you spent his and my money, insulted me in my own home, called me names, humiliated me, you made a fool of him online, and now you want me to help you?" I didn't let her get a word in and continued, feeling everything I'd been holding inside for so long boiling over. "Let me remind you, Cassandra, you were the one calling me a leech, you were the one telling me to get out of my own house, you were the one sending me messages calling me an old maid, an ugly, worthless woman. You wrote that I needed plastic surgery, that I was pathetic, and that you were jealous because no one wanted me. Remember all that?" There was silence on the other end, only her breathing, ragged, as if she hadn't expected me to speak to her so directly. I sighed and added softer but firmly, "You don't deserve someone like my brother, you don't deserve anyone who will be truly kind to you, because you don't know how to be kind yourself. Jake is better off without you now, and he knows it." And then something changed in her voice, the feigned weakness vanished, the pity vanished, and a cold, venomous irritation took over. "You're just mean, Brittany," she said. "You're mean and lonely. You've been jealous of everyone your whole life." I smiled, feeling everything inside me become calm, almost icy. "Maybe I am alone," I replied, looking at my reflection in the window, "but I'd rather be alone than with someone who destroys everything they touch." You confuse loneliness with peace, and I, Cassandra, finally live in peace. I hung up and sat for a long time, looking out the window, where the evening light softly dissolved in the glass, turning into a fine golden dust settling on the windowsill. I knew this was my last conversation with Cassandra. Afterward, a thick, viscous silence stretched between us, leaving no room for words, apologies, or any new attempts to make things right. And yet, as often happens, news about her came to me, not from her, of course, but from my mother, who, as if out of habit, still tried to see the best in people. She told me that Cassandra was seeing someone again. The guy's name was Derek, I think, or Darren. My mother wasn't sure, and it didn't really matter. The main thing, she said, was that he was a problematic person, a heavy drinker, and rumor had it he had a drug problem, too. I just sighed and replied wearily, "Well, Cassandra chose her own fate, now she has to live with that choice." My mother nodded silently, and I could see in her eyes that she agreed. She, like me, simply wanted to believe that people sometimes change. A few more months passed. Life went on as usual, measured, calm, almost peaceful. I started visiting my parents more often again, helping my mom around the house, and my dad would sometimes tease me like I was a schoolgirl. "So, Brittany, still working 7 days a week?" I laughed back, saying it was easier that way, less time for memories. But one Sunday became special. I went to my parents' house for dinner, and as soon as I opened the door, I heard a familiar voice coming from the kitchen. "Jake." We hadn't seen each other in a while, and although we texted occasionally, real-life communication was different. He turned around, and an awkward but warm smile flickered across his face. We sat at the table and ate in silence for a while, savoring the smell of fried chicken my mom had cooked especially for us, just like old times. "How are you, Jake?" I asked, pouring him some tea. He leaned back in his chair and smiled genuinely, a smile he hadn't seen in a long time. "Honestly? Everything's fine. In fact, it's great. I recently got a promotion, a higher position, and a salary, well, Let's just say I never thought I could earn this much. I clapped my hands. Wow. You deserve it, he nodded, then paused for a moment, and said, and I'm dating someone, her name is Amy, she's a teacher, so kind, so genuine. I feel safe with her, I smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a hint of irony. I'm happy for you, Jake, I replied quietly, and he realized I wasn't just being polite. A minute later, he suddenly became serious. Brittany, he began, I have to tell you something. I'm sorry, for everything, for letting Cassandra treat you like that, for not protecting you, for taking your money like you owed me. I was a fool, you were right about everything. He spoke, and I saw his fingers tremble. I wanted to hug him, but I held back, feeling tears welling in my eyes. I forgive you, I finally said. He reached out and hugged me tightly, truly, and in that moment, it seemed like the wall between us that had stood for so many years crumbled. As for Cassandra, the latest news about her was sad. Mom said she'd been seen recently, with that Derek or Darren, no one really remembered. She'd changed dramatically, a confused look, dull eyes, unkempt hair, a hunched back. Mom sighed as she told this, and I listened, feeling a strange mixture of regret and indifference. Yes, part of me pitied her, that young, bold woman who once believed the world would revolve around her. But another part knew, life always pays back. She thought she could humiliate, deceive, exploit, and everything would go unpunished, but that's not how it works. And me? My life was finally mine. I was still working as a dentist, and I once again enjoyed getting up in the morning, putting on my white coat, listening to my assistants' laughter, and the smell of fresh coffee pouring through the offices. On weekends, I went to the lake house, where the morning fog drifted across the water, and the wind smelled of pine and something familiar. Like childhood, I allowed myself to dream again, of travel, of love, of a new life no longer bound by the pain of the past. And, strangely enough, fate smiled upon me. Michael is a teacher, a colleague of Amy's. We met by chance, at a school fair where Amy had dragged both Jake and me. He's tall, with soft eyes so warm that I sometimes feel like I'm growing younger next to him. We started seeing each other, slowly, without big words or promises, just getting to know each other, as if everything that was happening had long ago been written somewhere above. I saved a lot, opened a savings account, bought the very car I'd been dreaming of for 10 years, and now, when the wind blows through my hair on the highway, I smile not at someone but at myself. Next year, I might finally go to Europe, to see Paris, where I've never been, and Italy, which I've always dreamed of. My relationship with my parents is warmer than ever, and with Jake, stronger than it was as a child, and looking back, I realize, sometimes you have to go through destruction to rebuild yourself. I've learned to be generous without allowing others to live off me, to love without losing my self-respect, to forgive without forgetting how important it is to say no, because, in the end, the only thing we truly own is our power to rise after the storm and choose who we will be next.